Maria carried the weight of each day like a sack of wet clothes slung across her shoulders. She returned home from work not only with sore arms and tired knees, but with a heart soaked in humiliation. Her uniform smelled sharply of common soap, the same scent that earned her cruel jokes in the very office she cleaned. For her boss, Dr. Edmilson, that scent was proof she belonged to another world, a cheaper, smaller world, one better kept invisible. Each day, he mocked her with words sharp enough to wound, yet tossed casually, like crumbs to a dog who dared enter the dining room. Still, Maria kept working. She bent her back over marble hallways, polished glass walls that reflected everyone but her. By the end of the day, she was nothing more than a shadow the rich stepped around. Yet fate, sly in its timing, had been waiting for her in the dust of the street. That late afternoon, while most hurried past with eyes fixed only on themselves, Maria saw a frail figure collapsed on the sidewalk. An old woman lay fallen, her thin hair tangled against the cement, her body forgotten by the crowd, as if she were no more significant than rubbish at the curb. Nobody stopped. Nobody asked. Maria did. Bending down, she lifted the woman with a gentleness born from her own scars and whispered reassurances, though no one else cared to listen. She half carried, half led the stranger to her tiny home. There, Maria offered what little she owned: shelter beneath a leaky roof, food from her modest pot, and affection from a heart that, for all its wounds, still bled kindness. She never imagined who this woman truly was, that, behind those wrinkled hands and tired eyes, hid the mother of the very man who humiliated her. Daily, it was in the silence of that poor home that something luminous was planted, a bond fragile yet fierce, stronger even than ties of blood, a single selfless act that would twist destiny itself, humbling arrogance and revealing that wealth lives not in pockets, but in hearts. And so our story begins. The night that followed arrived heavy. Stray dogs barked like watchmen in the alleys. Footsteps hurried past her door, and distant voices rose in quarrels. But inside the humble home, quiet settled like sacred cloth. Maria, practiced by years of hardship, rose before the rooster would scream the dawn. She lifted her weary body, joints crackling like dry twigs, ran her hand across her face, and checked first on her boy curled beneath a thin sheet. His lips parted in childish dreams, one arm wrapped tightly around a chipped wooden car. Turning, Maria's gaze rested on the old woman asleep in the corner. The mattress beneath her was nothing more than folded fabric stuffed with straw, but the way her white hair fanned across it made her seem like a child finally exhausted after long days of play. Through a crack in the patched roof, the sun's first faint ray slipped in, landing across the woman's face. Her eyes fluttered, blinking like someone just returned from a long sleep filled with silence. By then, coffee already bubbled on the stove, sending out warm fragrance that braided with the smell of soap wafting from the bucket Maria always kept ready at hand. Her boy awoke first, curiosity sparkling. Toy in hand, he tiptoed toward the mysterious guest, holding out his little car as though it were a treasure meant to be shared. The old woman, fragile hands trembling, offered him a small smile. It was faint, almost fragile, yet it lit her weary face with the brightness of a rising sun. Maria's chest warmed as she watched the exchange. With gentle care, she filled a dented aluminum cup with hot porridge, blowing across it as though blessing it with her breath. She placed it into the stranger's hands, steadying them when they shook. The old woman held her gaze, searching for words, though none came. Silence spoke louder, swollen with gratitude and emptiness alike. After the meal, Maria brought over a basin and knelt before her. Cupping the woman's cracked feet, she washed them carefully, sweeping away layers of dust, peeling back the calluses of long roads walked alone. It was as though she was washing not just feet, but years of neglect. She wiped them slowly, humming the lullaby her mother once sang in the fields, a sound carrying both sorrow and peace. Her boy sat still, hugging his car, wide-eyed at the sacredness of the moment. Then Maria took her time combing the white hair, gently, because each strand broke easily. The comb was old, missing teeth, yet in her hands it worked like a relic, pulling not just tangles but releasing memories left unsaid. The woman closed her eyes, sighed deeply, and overcome, leaned into Maria's palm as though it was the lap of her own long-lost youth. For the first time in years, her smile was free, full, soft, fearless. It touched her lips, glistened in her eyes, and radiated even in the way she bent down to greet the boy. Maria felt pain at how much loneliness lay hidden within her. How many years must have been endured in silence. But at the same time her chest ached with joy, with purpose, as though she finally discovered meaning inside her humble walls, something her boss's scoldings could never wash away. That morning was different from the mornings when she scrubbed perfume-soaked carpets. Here there was no imported coffee, no polished marble. There was the steam of corn, chickens scratching at dust, and the warmth of humanity itself. The boy began to sing one of the circle songs he'd picked up from other children in the street. The woman's face rippled with surprise. Then slowly she joined, a fragile voice layered with age yet steady, rediscovering forgotten corners of her soul. Maria stirred beans on the stove, spoon in hand, her eyes filling with tears as she watched them. Two people who had been strangers now bound through melody and kindness. When the song ended, the old woman placed her weathered palm on the child's hair, smoothing it with motherly affection. She looked up at Maria, her voice low, raw but firm. "It's been so long since someone treated me like a human being." Maria bit down against the lump swelling in her throat. She said nothing, only pressed her apron against her chest, as if to keep her heart from falling out. Outside, neighbors woke to another day. A crackling radio, brooms sweeping sidewalks, distant laughter. But inside that modest house, time itself paused. The boy, content, pushed his car gently on the floor. The frail woman studied the crooked nails on the wall and the cracks on the cement like they were marks on a sacred map. That morning, Maria did not know the depth of the old lady's secrets, that she carried burdens as heavy as the baskets of wet laundry Maria hauled each week. But she did know one thing, that love had already rooted itself in their poor home, and no arrogance, no insult, no humiliation could strip it away. The next day, Maria awoke with bones sore from labor, but a spirit lighter than it had been in years. Her boy was still asleep, toy car clutched against his chest. In the corner, the old woman snored gently, curled beneath the thin blanket as though resting on silk. Adjusting the covering lovingly, Maria placed a mug of water by her side, then kissed her boy's temple before slipping into her frayed uniform. With bucket in hand and scarf tied tight, she set out for work like a soldier with no weapon but faith. The streets were wet with dawn's dew, birds sang loudly, and Maria's strides seemed stronger. At the gate of the grand office building, she inhaled, steadying herself for the battlefield inside. The white-painted iron was stained already with city dust, yet also with the unspoken weight she carried each day past its threshold. Her co-workers looked up. Some giggled, others turned away. To their eyes, she was still just a shadow, a rag moving on two legs. But Maria knew something they didn't, that beneath her worn apron, her heart had been filled the night before with the rarest treasure. Kindness returned. The corridors smelled of expensive perfume and reheated coffee, of power and pride poorly masked. At the far end sat Dr. Edmilson in his heavy chair, papers strewn about like trophies. At Maria's arrival, his brow pinched, his finger tapped against polished wood. Late again. "Useless woman," he barked without lifting his gaze. Maria hugged her bucket to her side like a shield. Her breath deepened. She thought of the smile of the old woman at her home, the child's laughter, the sound of a forgotten lullaby reborn. Those thoughts lifted her like a fortress. The boss rose, pacing, veins swelling in his neck. "And if you break another cup," he snarled, "I'll cut it from your pay. Do you think cheap soap entitles you to clumsiness?" He shoved a box toward her. Maria trembled deep inside, but outward she remained still. She bent her head low and picked up her rag, focusing on silent work, her calm expression belying the fire of hurt. The other workers glanced her way with pity, but quickly busied with folders and papers. Here no one defended another. Fear ruled like a dictator. She bent to scrub the corners, each movement pressed with humiliation heavier than dust. Yet between brushes, she conjured the image of soft white hair beneath her hand, of the crack in her roof letting in morning light, of words whispered by the old woman. "It's been so long since someone treated me like a human being." The insult of useless healed faster than the memory of those words, for in her little house someone already saw her as more than necessary, saw her as indispensable, like an angel in disguise. The clock dragged slowly across the morning. Phones rang, heels clicked across polished halls, mugs clinked in distant rooms. The harassment nagged, the hours crawled. Still Maria cleaned, each sweep of her cloth a prayer to avoid hardness in her own heart. When noon arrived, she slipped outside to the quiet back step where workers went to smoke or hide. She opened a small parcel of bread and mortadella, sat on the edge and let the sun shine down on her tired face. Closing her eyes, half dreaming, half praying, Maria felt that instead of drinking bitterness, remembered the old woman having porridge, the boy's smile. In those few seconds, she found rest, even if Herbity was exhausted. When she finished, she washed her hands slowly, feeling the water run like a thread of life. She looked up at the sky, murmured softly, "Thank you, God, for giving me courage. Even when everything pushes me down, you hold me up." In the afternoon, while scrubbing the main hallway floor, she heard the boss yelling on the phone. He shouted, slammed the desk, talked about business, money, targets. Maria passed by almost invisible, but she heard when he said, "These simple people are only good for cleaning up the mess. They're leftovers, and leftovers have no voice." Maria gripped the rag tightly. She felt her face heat up. Inside her, a river of pain mixed with revolt rose to her chest, but instead of exploding, she took a deep breath. She thought of the old woman, thought of the boy. She knew dignity didn't live in the words of a bitter man, but in the small gestures done with a whole heart. When the workday ended, Maria quietly said goodbye, picked up her bucket and rag, and left through the gate. She walked slowly, each step heavy with the day's memories, but also with hope. Because despite the shouting, despite the contempt, she knew there was a warm corner waiting at home. A corner where Asmile was worth more than any fancy rug, where a mug of porridge was more precious than all the officers' imported coffee. At the corner, Maria stopped, closed her eyes, felt the wind on her face, the sound of cars, the smell of dust, the distant call of a mother calling her child. Everything blended into a single thought. Life humiliates me here, but it blesses me there. And at that moment, Maria knew that even the heaviest work couldn't steal the joy blooming within the poor walls of her home. A whole day of yelling, insults, and dirt could never erase the glow of a single true smile. His son was already hiding when Maria pushed open the wooden gate, which creaked like an old lady complaining about life. The smell of burnt beans filled the street. Barefoot kids played soccer, and chickens pecked at food scraps in the yards. When she entered the house, the first thing she saw was the boy sitting on the packed with floor beside the old woman, his eyes shining like someone listening to a fairy tale. The old woman was holding a piece of old faded hand-stitched fabric and telling stories from when she was a girl in the countryside, about waking up to roosters crowing and falling asleep to the sound of the wind rustling the thatched roof. She spoke of harvest festivals, long walks to the local shop, and clay pots that held the taste of childhood. The boy listened with his mouth slightly open, holding his little wooden car, swaying as if wanting to dance with the words. Maria dropped the bucket in the corner, leaned against the wall, and watched. She felt a lump in her throat. It was as if she were watching a play written for her soul. That boy, who used to run wild through the streets, now sat still, quiet, drinking in each sentence as if it were fresh water on a dry day. At one point, the old woman paused, took a deep breath, and began singing an old children's circle song. Her voice was weak, broken by time, but there was a hidden strength there, a deep root pulling memories from the earth. The boy suddenly stood up, clapped his hands, spun around her, making awkward little dance steps. His laughter filled the house, crossed the walls, spilled into the yard like a good breeze that announces rain. Maria couldn't hold back her tears. She felt a longing for her own mother, the woman who rocked her to the beat of drums and old stories. She missed the advice whispered by the stove, the smell of baked cornmeal, learning to pray by looking at the moon. But there, seeing her son find a grandmother of the heart, the emptiness seemed to fill. It was as if God was stitching a new family together. Using invisible threads of affection, the boy started calling the old woman Grandma of the Heart. It was spontaneous, unplanned, unasked. He just said it like someone freeing a caged bird. The old woman trembled, put her hand on her chest, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't answer with words. She simply opened her arms, and the boy dove into the hug as if finding shelter after a storm. From that day on, the house's routine changed. While Maria left early for work, the boy stayed glued to the old woman. They planted bean seeds in the yard, played at guessing cloud shapes, cooked cornmeal cakes on the griddle. The old woman taught him small prayers that mixed old blessings with folk songs. She said each word was like a brick in the house of faith. One late afternoon, sitting on the doorstep, the old woman told of when she had to leave her own home because of fights among siblings, of the times she ate only flour and water, of the nights she cried quietly so her children wouldn't hear. The boy, serious, held her hand tightly. He didn't understand it all, but he felt her pain through the touch as if his heart were a board where she could hammer nails and pull out splinters. One night, while Maria washed clothes at the sink, she heard the boy ask, "Grandma, why were you alone on the street?" The old woman stayed silent. She looked up at the sky, sighed deeply, and answered, "Because the world is big, but some people's hearts are too small to hold a mother." The phrase echoed, hammering the walls, sticking to the ceiling like a hard truth to swallow. Maria stopped scrubbing, wiped her hands on her skirt, went to them, and sat beside them. She joined their hands in hers as if sealing a pact. They sat there, the three of them, looking into the dark, listening to the distant sound of an old radio playing a slow drum beat. Little by little, the old woman became a root in that house. She was no longer a guest. She was floor, roof, embrace. When the boy got sick, she was the one who put a warm hand on his forehead, murmured prayers, and whispered words that felt like medicine. When Maria came home tired, she was the one who offered herbal tea, who held Maria's face in both hands, looking deep as if seeing her soul dot in the neighborhood. People started talking. They said Maria had become the old woman's daughter of the heart, and the boy was now her borrowed grandson. Some mocked, others admired, but inside those crooked walls no one cared about gossip. Their love spread like a vine, filling every cracked dot in that bond between the boy and the old woman. Maria found the answer to so many questions fate had never bothered to explain. She understood that sometimes family is born from care, not blood, and that broken hearts recognize each other in silence, in the smell of porridge, in the palm of a hand offered without hesitation. At the end of each night, when everything was silent, Maria stood on the doorstep, watching the two of them sleeping. The boy curled up around the old woman's leg like a puppy snuggling against its mother. She took a deep breath, feeling that even after so much pain, there was a miracle happening there, slowly stitched into each small gesture. And in that quiet, Maria whispered to herself, God hasn't forgotten us. He just takes his time. But when he comes with tenderness. The sun had barely risen when Maria opened her eyes that morning. The smell of weak coffee drifted through the kitchen, mixed with the rhythmic sound of the boy playing in the yard, pushing his little wooden car that had more patches than paint. Maria looked toward the corner where the old woman usually slept, expecting to see the crumpled sheet, her white hair spread out on the makeshift pillow. But the mattress was empty, smooth, as if no one had slept there that night. Maria's heart beat differently, a dry, anxious thump. She went to the bathroom, opened the door slowly, and called softly, Mother, are you there? Silence! She ran to the yard, looked behind the sink near the papaya tree, but only found the boy, who looked at her curiously. Maria went back inside, sat down on the floor, running her hands over her head, trying to search her memory for any warning, any word that might explain that absence. The boy ran in, holding the old woman's worn-out slipper. His eyes trembled. His lower lip quivered as if tears were ready to burst. He held the slipper to his chest, clutching it like a treasure. Mama, where's Grandma of the Heart? The question fell to the floor like a glass cup. Maria couldn't answer. She simply pulled the boy onto her lap, hugged him tightly while his tears soaked the sleeve of her uniform. Without waiting, Maria stood up, opened the gate, and went out into the street. The boy followed, holding the slipper. They walked through the neighborhood, asked the neighbor, sweeping her sidewalk, the butcher adjusting the hooks, the woman at the grocery store arranging onions on the stand. No one knew. No one had seen. The silence in their answers hurt more than any harsh word. Maria walked hurriedly, her bare feet on the hot dirt, her face covered in sweat and fear. The boy ran behind her, whimpering, stumbling over stones. At each corner, Maria shouted the name she didn't fully know yet, the name that now sounded like that of a true mother. Dot. In her mind, a whole movie played. The conversations on the doorstep, the circle songs, the smell of herbal tea, the exchanged smiles at dawn. She thought of the loneliness in the old woman's eyes, the pain hidden in her trembling hands. She wondered if maybe the old woman had felt like a burden, had decided to leave so she wouldn't be in the way. That thought cut like a knife. They returned home with shaky legs, spinning heads, and empty chests. The boy dropped the slipper on the floor and threw himself onto the mattress, sobbing. Maria stood in the middle of the room, staring at nothing, feeling a hole open up inside her. It was a silence that screamed. The house, once full of songs and laughter, now felt like a cold cave. Dot in the kitchen. Maria tried to cook beans, but her hand trembled. The spoon clanged against the pot like a church bell. She stopped, dropped everything, sat on the floor, and cried. She cried like she hadn't since her husband's funeral, when she had gripped the coffin with both hands and felt the world collapse. At that moment, the boy came over, knelt beside her, and held her hand gently. Mama, Grandma's coming back, right? He asked in a weak voice, his eyes wet. Maria tried to smile, but the smile came out crooked, sad, torn. She ran her hand over the boy's face, pulled him to her chest, kissed his forehead, and simply said, "We will wait." It was a simple sentence, but carried a promise, a hope that still flickered like a candle in the wind. The hours dragged. On that day, the boy sat on the doorstep, watching the street like someone waiting for a father to return from the fields. Maria swept the yard nonstop, picking up leaves that didn't even exist, trying to occupy her mind. Every now and then, she looked at the gate, imagining she'd see the fragile figure of the old woman appear with her torn bag on her arm. But the gate stayed silent. Still at night, the boy insisted on sleeping on the mattress where the old woman used to stay. He said he wanted to keep her place. Maria agreed. She covered him, sat beside him, running her hand through his hair until he fell asleep. Then she stayed there, staring into the dark, praying softly, asking God to bring the old woman back between one sigh and another. She remembered the words the old woman had once said. The world is big, but some people's hearts are too small to hold a mother. That night, Maria understood that her greatest fear wasn't losing her job or facing the boss's shouting. The greatest fear was losing that bond that had formed, that family that had sprouted from dust, from nothing. Feeling that emptiness was like having the ground pulled out from under her feet. And she, so used to fighting, now found herself on her knees, begging the sky for an answer, while the boy slept hugging the slipper. Maria looked up at the ceiling, listening to the night sounds of the neighborhood, a dog barking in the distance, the neighbor's old radio, the wind knocking against a hanging can. Each noise felt like an unanswered question, and in the middle of that noisy silence, Maria understood that true love leaves a space no one else can fill. In that moment, she promised herself she wouldn't give up. Even without knowing where to look, even without strength in her feet, she would keep waiting. Because those who learn to love truly also learn to wait, even if it hurts, even if the world says it's pointless. Dawn arrived slowly, heavy with low clouds, as if the sky itself was in mourning. Maria got up before the rooster crowed, her body tired, her soul even more so. The boy remained curled up on the mattress, hugging the old woman's worn-out slipper, breathing unevenly as if dreaming about something he didn't want to wake from. Maria ran her hand through his hair, adjusted the blanket, and left without making a sound. The gate creaked, exposing the pain she carried tight in her chest. On the way, the street felt longer, the world colder. The bucket knocked against her leg, marking every step left to reach the office. Her mind spun like clothes in a wash basin. Where would she be now? Had she eaten? Was she cold? Was she lying on some sidewalk like the first day they met? Each question felt like a stone in her shoe. But Maria kept going because she knew work didn't wait for a heart to heal. When she arrived at the office, the gate was wide open. Unlike every other day, employees were running everywhere. Papers flew. Broken cups littered the floor. Maria walked in slowly, holding the bucket tighter than ever. She felt that something big had happened. Something fate had been stitching together silently for a long time. In the main hallway, Dr. Ed Milson, the boss who always humiliated her, was standing, his face red, eyes wide open. His tie hung crooked around his neck as if choking what little dignity he had left. He was shouting, gesturing wildly, pushing tables and chairs. "My mother is gone." "She's gone!" he screamed, spitting the words as if spitting fire. Maria froze. The bucket nearly fell from her hand. Her body turned cold. The air grew heavy, hard to breathe. "Mother," he repeated, louder each time, more desperate. The hallway filled with voices. Employees whispered, exchanged looks. The boss's mother. He had a mother. A woman from accounting asked, "Hand over her mouth." "He never mentioned her," murmured a man, pushing a stack of folders. Maria felt her legs weaken, her head spun like a windmill, piecing everything together. The old woman, the silences, the distant gaze, the stories that ended mid-synod. The truth stood there, raw and bare. The old woman she had welcomed was the mother of that man, the man who spat hatred in every sentence, who mocked the soap on her uniform, who treated people like dust. Dr. Ed Milson collapsed to his knees in the middle of the hallway. Papers scattered around him like dry leaves. He grabbed his head, pulled out his hair, hit the floor. A hoarse sob escaped, a sound that seemed to come from deep inside, heavy as a millstone. Maria stood still, motionless, the bucket trembling in her hand. Inside, a storm of emotions, pity, anger, compassion, indignation, all mixed together like cornmeal batter rushed by hand. She wanted to run, scream, shake that man and say she was there, longing for your embrace. She needed you and you. You only knew how to shout, but she stayed silent because she knew that sometimes silence speaks louder than any scream. The employees stepped back. Some cried. Others just watched from afar, as if witnessing a tragic play. The phone rang non-stop, but no one answered. Coffee cooled in abandoned cups. The entire office felt like a stage for tragedy, each actor forgetting their lines. Ed Milson got up with difficulty, walked to his office, and slammed the door shut. The glass trembled. Silence spread. Maria stayed in the hallway, eyes fixed on the closed door. She could hear inside muffled crying, furniture being pushed, stumbling steps. It was the sound of guilt gnawing at his soul, the sound of someone realizing too late. That money doesn't buy a mother's lap. That status doesn't buy forgiveness. But Maria dropped the bucket in the corner, leaned against the wall. Her hands were sweaty, her heart racing. She remembered the boy, the way he ran into the old woman's lap, the circle song she sang. She remembered the words, "The world is big, but some people's hearts are too small to hold a mother." There, in the middle of that cold hallway, Maria understood that the boss, with all his wealth, was poorer than her because she, even with a dirt floor, an old pot, and a sweaty uniform, had a house full of love, and he, with all his pomp, was alone, clinging to papers and empty walls. Some employees began to leave, shaking their heads, murmuring quiet prayers. Others avoided looking at Maria as if afraid her eyes might reveal secrets buried deep inside. She took a deep breath, picked up the bucket, and went to the storeroom where she sat on a crate and cried softly. She cried for Edmilson. She cried for the old woman. She cried for herself because she knew the world was cruel to those who love too much, and to those who don't know how to love at all. In the middle of her tears, she felt a strength sprout, a gentle but firm certainty. The truth sooner or later appears. Goodness, even when silent, triumphs, and God's justice never misses an address. The sun dripped down the office roof tiles as Maria went out to dump the dirty water. Her legs still trembled, her heart beat like a drum on the day of a sad festival. The hallway remained silent, the air heavy, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Maria passed through the big gate, felt the heat burn her face but didn't care. She needed to feel the outside world, needed a sign, any breeze to remind her that life existed beyond humiliations and screams. Outside, the street carried on. Street vendors shouted prices for wilted vegetables. Kids ran barefoot after old tires. Mothers called their children back inside. But in the middle of that familiar chaos, Maria saw something that made her body freeze. There she was, right at the office gate. The old woman, her dress wrinkled, a torn bag on her arm, and on her face, a smile so wide it looked like an embrace. In her eyes, a shine that carried secrets bigger than the world. Next to her, a small bag full of colorful candies wrapped in simple paper. Maria put her hand over her mouth, tears running freely. She ran toward the old woman, her heart pounding faster than her steps. When she got close, she stopped, looked deep into the old woman's eyes, as if checking if it was a dream or real. The old woman opened her arms, and Maria threw herself into them like a daughter returning to her mother's lap. "After a long journey, I went to buy some candies for my grandson of the heart," said the old woman, her voice weak but firm, holding the bag with care. Maria sobbed, words lost between tears and relief. The boy appeared running from across the street barefoot, dust rising behind him. When he saw the old woman, he screamed so loudly that the neighbors stopped in their tracks. He ran, stumbled, got up, and finally dove into her arms. The old woman held him tight, kissed his forehead, ran her hand through his hair. It was a reunion that seemed to carry all the unspoken goodbyes in the world. People started to gather on the sidewalk. Curious, they whispered to each other, pointed, trying to understand that scene that mixed pain, tenderness, and a mystery bigger than any gossip. Then Dr. Ed Milson appeared at the gate, his eyes swollen, his face pale, his body bent as if carrying a sack of stones on his back. When he saw his mother, he stood frozen, silent. For a few seconds, the whole world stopped too. The car noises, the bird song, everything seemed to hush. Ed Milson took a step, then another, his gaze fixed on his mother. His mouth trembled. His hands moved aimlessly. He started running towards her like a boy desperate for a mother's embrace. But before he could reach her, the old woman turned, grabbed Maria's hand, and pulled the boy closer. "Mother, forgive me!" Edmilson cried, falling to his knees in the street dust. "Come home, please. I'll take you right now." The old woman looked at him with a calmness sharper than any shout. Her silence was a sentence. Edmilson stretched out his hands, begging. But the old woman slowly shook her head. "You forgot what it means to care. You forgot that a mother isn't a trophy, isn't a piece of furniture to decorate a living room." Her voice came out slow, as if each word were a nail hammered into wood. Ed Milson wept like a child, his body swaying, dust sticking to his expensive suit. The whole neighborhood watched, pressed against gates, some with hands on their chests, others holding back tears. It was a scene no one could have imagined. The rich, powerful man thrown into the dirt, and the mother, fragile but sogent. She seemed to hold up the sky. The old woman held Maria's face, wiped her tears with her thumb, and smiled. Then she looked at the boy, handed him the bag of candies, and said, "I went to find a gift for you. I didn't want to come back empty-handed." The boy held the bag as if holding a crown, hugging the old woman with all the strength his little body could muster. Maria looked at Edmilson but said nothing. Her silence was louder than any sermon. The old woman then turned to her son, who remained kneeling. She looked at him with wet eyes, but without a hint of trembling. "This woman here," she said, pointing at Maria, "gave me what you never knew how to give. Care, and care is worth more than a big house, a car, or all the money in the world." Edmilson lowered his head, his forehead touching the ground. His crying turned into sobs, his entire body shook. The neighbors began to drift away, some whispering prayers, others shaking their heads silently, understanding that on that street, a rich man had just lost the only true wealth he ever had. Maria held the old woman's hand, squeezing it gently. In that squeeze, she felt a promise, a strength that couldn't be bought or sold. The boy hugged them both at the same time, as if he wanted to piece back together the parts of the world that had been shattered. In that reunion, no one left the same. The street, so often the stage for empty laughter, now witnessed the greatest lesson of all. True love can't be begged for, can't be bought, can't be shouted. It is planted in silence, and when it blooms, it lights up even the darkest corners of the soul. Edmilson remained on his knees, his face buried in the hot dust, his expensive suit stained like a rag forgotten in the yard. His hands trembled, grabbing handfuls of dirt as if trying to hold on to a past slipping through his fingers. Around him, people watched, some in absolute silence, others murmuring quiet prayers. Maria, with the boy on one side and the old woman on the other, stood still, her eyes fixed on that scene that hurt, and at the same time set her free. The old woman took a deep breath, pulling in the air like someone bracing for a storm. She walked slowly toward her son, each step heavy, as if she carried an entire world on her back. When she got close, she reached out her hand, but not to caress. She passed her hand lightly through the air, almost touching his head, but then pulled back. "Get up, my son." Her voice came out gentle but firm as stone. "The ground won't give you back what you lost inside. In your heart." Edmilson slowly raised his head, his eyes swollen, his unshaven face, his pride shattered. He tried to grab the hem of her dress, but she pulled it away gently like someone untying an old knot. "Mother, I." The words tangled, dying in his throat. He opened his mouth, but only sobs came out. The old woman knelt down to his level, looked deep into his eyes. Those same eyes that once saw life for the first time in her hands. "You forgot that a mother isn't a metal toe hang on a wall or a trophy to show off to others. A mother is a root. When you cut the root, the tree might still stand, but it dries up inside." She spoke each word as if planting cassava in hard soil, her hands firm but also full of love. Edmilson shook, trying to hold her dress again. "I did everything to give you a good life. A house, food, security." He babbled, tears falling like heavy rain on a tin roof. "A good life." The old woman shook her head, laughing without joy. "A good life isn't a soft bed or a full plate. A good life is feeling your child's hand when your leg gives out. It's hearing 'I love you' without having to ask. It's a sincere hug at the end of the day." The neighbors drew closer, but no one dared interrupt. It was as if the air itself was suspended, waiting for each word to hit the ground and take root. Maria squeezed the boy's hand, who watched everything with wide eyes, as if witnessing something sacred. The boy understood, even if he couldn't explain. He understood that love isn't the sound of coins, nor the smell of imported perfume. Love is a full silence, a small gesture that shouts louder than any speech. The old woman pointed at Maria, her finger firm. "This woman here, Theon you humiliated so much, gave me everything I needed. She washed my feet as if she were my daughter, combed my hair as if she were my mother. She had nothing but gave me everything." Her voice was now like a gentle thunder going through the soul's walls. Edmilson looked at Maria, his eyes full of shame. He tried to speak but choked on his own guilt. His silence weighed more than any insult he had ever heard. Maria said nothing. She just looked at him firm, her face serene, but her eyes wet. It was as if she was saying, "I see who you really are now." The old woman caressed Maria's face, pulled her close. "Thank you, daughter. Thank you for reminding me what it is to feel human." Then she turned again to Edmilson. "I will not return to that big house. My home is where I am loved, where I am truly seen." And here I found that Edmilson fell backward, sitting in the dust, hands on his face, rocking like a lost child. His world collapsed, not for lack of money or comfort, but because he realized too late that he had become an orphan of a living mother. The old woman, Maria, and the boy stood still. The sun slowly dipped, painting the sky orange, while the entire street watched the most painful and true spectacle they had ever seen. It wasn't a soap opera, it was life. It was the open wound of a man who forgot to water the roots, and now reaped only silence. In that moment, Maria took a deep breath, pulled the old woman by the arm, and started walking. The boy followed close behind, holding tightly to the hem of her dress. The old woman didn't look back. She didn't need to. She had already said everything a mother's heart could say. Dot and Edmondson, left on the ground, clung only to the echo of his own choices. The greatest lesson had been given, not in shouts, but in a silence loaded with truth. The walk back to the village was long, but each step felt like it lit a flame inside Maria. The old woman walked beside her, her wrinkled hand resting on Maria's arm, holding on lightly, but also with the firmness of someone who had finally found a place where she belonged. The boy skipped ahead, carefully carrying the bag of candies as if it were a treasure. The sky was already dressing itself in purple and orange, announcing the night, and a gentle breeze blew, taking with it the dust and pain left in front of the office. When they reached Maria's wooden gate, the old woman stopped, looked around, and took a deep breath. She looked at the small yard, the cracked sink, the beaten earth floor marked with sandal prints. She looked at the boy, smiling proudly, showing off the candies, and then at Maria, who looked at her with tearful but serene eyes. It was there, in the simplicity of that cramped ground, that the old woman understood. Love lived in that dust, in that old pot, in the cold water from the sink, and in the boy's smile. Neighbors began to gather, curious. A woman selling tapioca at the gate asked, unable to hide her surprise, "Lady, aren't you going back to the mansion?" The old woman smiled, a smile full of scars, but true. She adjusted the scarf on her head and replied firmly, "I traded the big house for this small one because here my heart fits. Where there's love, there is space." The murmuring started. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered, some even laughed as if it were impossible for someone to choose affection over comfort. But the old woman didn't care. The voices of the curious no longer reached the depths of her chest. What mattered was that moment, that choice, that new root sprouting there. Maria, eyes shining, held her hand. There were no words to thank her, only a hand squeeze that spoke more than any sentence could. The boy ran inside, dropped the candies on the table, ran back, and hugged the old woman around her legs. "Grandma, are you going to stay forever now?" he asked, his small voice full of hope. The old woman slowly knelt down, held his face in her trembling hands, and said, "As long as God allows, my son. And even after, I'll stay in every corner of this house, in the smell of porridge, in the circle songs, in the wind that passes through this door." Maria couldn't hold it anymore. She let the tears flow without shame, without hurry. She felt her chest open, as if finally she could breathe after years of drowning. It was as if life itself whispered in silence. "See, love is stronger than any wealth." The following days were different. The old woman began to help Maria with everything. Early in the morning, she sat on the doorstep peeling cassava, watching the boy play with his little car. In the afternoon, she sold little cakes at the gate, chatted with neighbors, told old stories that made the children stop to listen. At night, she sat in the yard looking at the starry sky, murmuring quiet prayers, grateful for finding a home where she no longer needed to beg for affection. The women of the village started to comment, "That old lady is different. It's like she brought light into Maria's house." And another would reply, "Sometimes we think a good house is a big one, but it's a house with a soul that really makes us live." The boy went to school with more joy. He came back telling the old woman everything, who listened attentively, laughing at his antics, praising every drawing, every crooked letter in his notebook. He told his friends, "I have a grandma of the heart who teaches me to be strong." Maria, even exhausted from work, came home to a hug, a warm plate of food, a soft word. Little by little, the harshness of her days at the office seemed to lose its strength. What was once only exhaustion turned into fuel because she knew she had someone to fight for. The old woman sitting in the yard would always say, "The world might laugh at our small house, but it doesn't know the wealth that lives here." And so the house that was once just a poor shelter turned into living refuge full of laughter, the smell of cakes, and the sound of songs. The old woman no longer needed imported rugs or fancy curtains. There, each crack in the wall told a story. Each dented pot held a taste of victory. On that firm choice, the old woman became a root, and Maria, a flower blooming in the impossible. The boy grew strong, carrying on his shoulders not the weight of poverty, but the lightness of a love no one could ever steal. And throughout the village, the story spread from mouth to mouth like a breath of hope, because everyone saw that in the end, the greatest wealth wasn't money, but the courage to choose where the heart feels at home. Time went by, but for Edmondson, each day felt longer than the last. The big house, once full of servants, fake laughs, and the clinking of glasses toasting deals, had turned into a tomb of silence. The gate that used to open for important guests and flattering colleagues now creaked empty. The hallways seemed to scream with loneliness. echoing his steps like aliment. Ed Nilsson paced back and forth, his expensive shoes marking the cold marble. The scent of imported perfumes no longer comforted him. The grand piano in the main room, once a showpiece of status, now collected dust. He looked at the photo of his mother on the wall, an old picture taken when she still smiled with bright, lively eyes. He would sit on the edge of the enormous bed, holding the pillow, trying to breathe in a scent that no longer existed. He tried to remember the times his mother cradled his head in her lap when he was still a scared little boy, but the more he remembered, the more it hurt. Because now he understood that all the gold he carried in his pocket could never pay for the tenderness of a simple caress. Many mornings Edmilson sent messages to Maria. He offered money, furniture, expensive clothes, anything to get his mother back. He sent bags full of gifts as if love could be wrapped and delivered. But the old woman returned everything, always sending back a short note. "My place is where I am loved, not where I am displayed." The whole village talked. "Did you see? The doctor now lives alone in that cold mansion." Some shook their heads, others sighed, remembering how life always turns. Because the one who once humiliated today harvested only silence for company. Meanwhile, Maria kept working at the office, but she was no longer the same. She walked with her head high, her steps steady. Her co-workers now looked at her with new respect, perhaps even shame. They knew that even after being called useless so many times, she was the one who took in the boss's mother, who gave love where there had only been harshness. Edmilson avoided her. He rushed through the hallways, slammed doors shut, pretended to be on the phone. He couldn't meet her gaze. Maria, for her part, didn't need to say a single word. Her silence was a mirror that showed him every failure, every cruel word he had spat. At home, life kept pulsing. The old woman sold cakes at the gate. The boy studied more eagerly, and Maria came home exhausted but happy. The walls of that little house, once cold, now held stories, songs, and the sweet smell of freshly baked cake. At night, Edmilson would stand at the mansion window, staring at the closed gate, remembering the days he ignored his mother when she asked to sit by his side to hear a story, or simply hold his hand. He remembered the time she left her alone at the table while he went off to empty meetings. Now the big dining table felt like an island in the middle of the sea, and he cast away of himself. With every failed attempt to bring his mother back, Edmilson sank deeper into shame. The house grew darker, even with all the lights on. The shine of money could no longer blind him to the truth hammering in his mind. The greatest poverty doesn't live in your pocket, but in an empty soul. One day, Edmilson tried to organize a dinner party, invited a few acquaintances to fill the void, but no one showed up. Some gave excuses, others didn't even answer. In that moment, he realized even his friendships had been bought, fragile as wet paper. He sat alone at the table, the banquet untouched, the expensive wine serving only to reflect his loneliness at the bottom of the glass. While Edmilson drowned in silence, Maria blossomed in the village. The boy was now known as the old woman's grandson of the heart. He received candy from neighbors, helped his grandmother at the gate, learned the cake recipes and the songs she sang patiently. People would stop in front of their small house to listen to the old woman telling stories, giving life advice. Maria listened from the kitchen, smiling quietly. She knew that was the greatest payment anyone could receive, seeing the home become a shelter, seeing souls warm themselves there. Edmilson, meanwhile, roamed the mansion like a ghost. The garden, once full of imported flowers, had turned into tall weeds. The pool, once a gleaming blue, was now a murky mirror of dead leaves. Every detail screamed the neglect he once imposed on his own mother. Thus, day by day, Ed Nelson's humiliation didn't come from shouts or harsh words. It was a silent punishment, a pain that gnawed from the inside out. Loneliness, his worst enemy, followed him through every hallway, every untouched plate, every cold night. And in the village, everyone knew the man who humiliated the cleaning lady now lived trapped inside his own arrogance, swallowing his shame in silence. Meanwhile, Maria, the woman once called useless, became the living example that simple, humble, and true love is the greatest treasure a person can possess. Time passed, and each day dawned with a different kind of strength in that small house, where the beaten earth floor held secrets and silent victories. The yard, once empty and dry, had turned into a space full of life. The old woman, with her hands firm despite the years, began to plant vegetables, herbs, and a few small flowers. With each seedling she buried, she said a phrase like a prayer. Whoever plants with love harvests twice as much. The boy watched everything with curiosity. Holding a small makeshift hoe that his heart-grandmother had fashioned from a piece of wood and an old can, he asked about everything. Why the leaf was green? Why the beans sprouted so fast? Why the mint smelled so strong? The old woman answered with patience. Each explanation was a story, a memory from the past, a lesson that went far beyond the soil. Meanwhile, Maria came home from work later and later, her body tired, her shoulders curved. But as soon as she stepped through the gate, the exhaustion seemed to evaporate. The smell of corn cake, the sound of singing coming from the yard, the boy running to show her what he had planted. All of it healed the wounds that the world insisted on opening. The neighbors began to appear more and more, drawn by the smell of the little cakes the old woman made. She set up a small wooden table at the gate, covered with a colorful cloth where she sold cakes, herbal tea, and some rapadura sweets that she learned to make with Maria. The table became a meeting point. People came not only to buy, but to talk, to hear advice, to share secrets that no one else would listen to. The old woman, with her silent wisdom, listened to everything. Sometimes she replied with a short sentence that echoed deep inside. The world only hurts those with good souls. Other times, she just smiled, held the neighbor's hand, squeezed it firmly, and that gesture alone was enough. The boy became a faithful helper. He ran to fetch more tea, arranged the coins, wrapped the cakes. With each sale, he celebrated as if he had won a trophy. He was proud to say, "Grandma taught me." The old woman would laugh, stroke his face, and say, "You are my greatest harvest." At school, the boy changed. He was no longer the shy child who hid behind others. Now he spoke with shining eyes, presented his schoolwork confidently, shared his grandmother's stories that left his classmates amazed. One day the teacher called Maria and said, "Your son has a heart bigger than this whole classroom." Maria held back tears, smiled, and replied, "It's his heart, grandmother's legacy." At night, when silence took over the village, Maria sat in the yard looking at the stars. The old woman beside her moved her wooden rosary beads, murmuring prayers that came from far away, mixed with songs that seemed to rock the sky to sleep. The boy lying in his grandmother's lap listened, half asleep, half dreaming. In that yard, more than plants were being born. A strength was growing. A strength only those who know pain and true love can understand. A strength that grows in silence, strengthens in humility, and blooms in gratitude. When Maria looked at the old woman, she saw more than just a woman. She saw an ancient tree full of scars but still standing, offering shade and fruit. The boy, without realizing it, was becoming a little man, learning that the value of things isn't in their price, but in the stories they carry. He learned that callous hands can hold the whole world, that the smile of someone we love heals more than any medicine. The village began to call Maria the mother of courage. People would say that woman has a heart big enough for the whole village, and she shy would smile, adjust the scarf on her head, and reply, "God gave me courage, and this mother here beside me taught me how to use it." The yard also became a classroom. The old woman sat on a little bench surrounded by children, telling old stories from when the world was all forest, when they cooked on open fire and danced to the sound of drums. Each word was a seed, each laugh a flower blooming in the children's chests. And so, in that little house, a strength was born so great that it crossed the walls and reached the hearts of everyone passing by on the street. One day, a lady who always bought cakes said, "We come here for food, but we leave carrying soul." Maria understood in the silence of the nights and the chaos of the days that the greatest miracle wasn't just saving the old woman from the street. It was turning pain into flowers, humiliation into song, scorn into roots. It was realizing that everything we plant in the yard of life one day returns in the form of a hug. Time with its river-like patience carved deeper wrinkles into the old woman's face. But it also drew peace into every corner of that small house. The boy grew quickly, his feet becoming too big for the patched sandals, his eyes turning serious, full of dreams. The entire village watched the transformation of that family, stitched not by blood but by gestures, silences, and hugs that held the soul together. Meanwhile, in the abandoned mansion, Edmilson spent his days sitting in the armchair in the living room, staring at empty walls. The sound of his mother's footsteps no longer echoed. The smell of simple tea, which he once despised, never returned. The piano remained silent, as if in mourning he sold part of the company to keep up appearances, but nothing filled the hole growing inside him. Money, once his shield and pride, had become a bitter memory. In Maria's small house, the old woman lived her final years surrounded by love. She woke up to the smell of simple coffee, to the sound of the boys studying aloud, reading lessons clearly so she could hear. Third was filled with the scent of cake, tea, and fresh leaves. Every afternoon she sat on a wooden chair at the gate, smiling at Packasby, blessing them with a gentle wave. One evening, after telling the boy yet another old story, the old woman closed her eyes and passed away. She left with a serene face, a light smile, as if falling asleep after a day well lived. Maria held her hand until the last breath, whispering prayers and silently giving thanks. The boy, now a young man, cried as he hugged his heart, grandmother, murmuring, "You taught me everything I needed to become a man." The wake was simple, but full of people. There were no expensive flowers or empty speeches. Neighbors brought cakes. Children held flowers from the yard. Old ladies cried into their handkerchiefs. Everyone carried a memory, a phrase, a blessing. There. Everyone understood that woman left no inheritance of money, but an invisible treasure worth more than any fortune. After her passing, Maria decided to turn the kitchen into a small cantina, using the recipes and secrets she had learned from the old woman. The entire village supported her. Soon, the gate was crowded with people waiting for warm cakes, stews, and stories told by the stove. The house remained small, but it became the biggest gathering point in the area. The boy grew up, studied hard, graduated, and returned home. On graduation day, he stood at the kitchen door, looked at Maria, and said with a choked voice, "You didn't teach me how to be rich. You taught me how to be human." Maria couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged her son tightly, feeling in that embrace the arms of all the ancestors, of all the mothers who came before her. The village began to call Maria the mother of courage. Children stopped at the gate just to hear a "God bless you." Women came seeking advice, recipes, or comfort. The house became a home for many who had no one else. On a quiet afternoon, Maria was hanging clothes on the line. The sky was clear, a blue that looked hand-painted. The wind made the sheets dance as if in celebration. Maria stopped, looked up, and took a deep breath. She murmured softly, as if speaking to God, to the old woman, to her late husband, to all the pains that had turned into flowers. Those who plant love harvest a full home, even if it's small. And in that moment, Maria understood once and for all that the greatest victory wasn't having money, nor being loudly praised. The greatest victory was having a yard full of living memories, a heart full of stories, and a house that pulsed like a great open heart. Thus, the story of the cleaning lady, who was once humiliated, who took in an old woman she didn't know was the boss's mother, became more than a lesson. It became a silent legacy passed from mouth to mouth, inspiring those who think it's too late to start over, those who believe kindness is weakness, those who forgot that true wealth lives in what cannot be bought. And in the village, whenever the sun set, someone would always say, "At Maria's house, love doesn't fit just in the heart. It overflows through the gate, invades the street, and fills the world."